She stood on stages most people only saw on magazine covers. Her voice rode beats that defined an era. And for a brief moment, the industry listened. But today, her name rarely comes up. When people talk about female rappers who broke barriers, her name is missing. When Detroit celebrates its hip-hop legacy, her story is often left out. Yet she was there early. Before the wave. Before the rules were written. She did not arrive polished or protected. She arrived hungry. She arrived with verses sharpened by struggle and choices that carried consequences. While others were finding their image, she was finding ways to survive. There is a strange silence that follows artists like her. Not because they lack talent, but because their story makes people uncomfortable. This is not just a story about music. It is a story about how quickly the industry takes, and how quietly it forgets. About a woman who helped open doors that others later walked through with ease. So the question is not whether she mattered. The question is why we stopped saying her name. Before the music, there was structure. Before the streets, there were rules. She was born in Detroit in the fall of 1969. The youngest of 3 sisters, in a household that valued discipline and faith. Her mother taught school. Her father worked in the auto industry. Both were active in the church. This was not chaos. This was order. A home where expectations were clear and the future was supposed to be steady. She grew up on the west side of the city, just south of 8 Mile. She attended private school. She studied ballet. She learned how to carry herself in rooms that expected good behavior and quiet confidence. At school, she was not invisible. She was captain of the cheerleading team. A member of the homecoming court. A student who knew how to lead and how to perform, long before a microphone ever entered the picture. But Detroit in the late 70s and 80s carried 2 rhythms. One came from classrooms and churches. The other came from speakers turned up loud, telling stories no textbook ever would. Hip-hop reached her early. Not as rebellion, but as recognition. By the time she entered high school, she was writing rhymes in notebooks, practicing over other artists' beats, testing her voice against the sounds that shaped her generation. She watched her older sister perform at clubs, DJing and rapping late into the night, and saw a version of possibility that did not exist in her school curriculum. Her first performance came in 9th grade. At a school event. It was small. It was local. But it was real. The reaction told her something important. People listened. After graduation, she enrolled in a local community college. On paper, it was the responsible choice. In reality, her heart was already somewhere else. She loved hip-hop too much to treat it as a hobby. She studied the greats. East Coast voices. West Coast aggression. Groups that turned anger into clarity. Stories that felt closer to the truth than anything polite. She spent her nights battling local rappers, winning respect one verse at a time. Her name began to travel through Detroit's underground scene. Home studios replaced classrooms. Late nights replaced lectures. One early recording, placed on a local compilation, marked her first official step into the industry. She called herself Lady the Boss then. A name that sounded like confidence, even when certainty was still far away. What became clear, very quickly, was that Detroit could shape her, but it could not contain her ambitions. To go further, she would have to leave. Not because she lacked support, but because the industry gates she wanted to walk through were built somewhere else. And that decision would change everything. Leaving Detroit was not a glamorous move. There were no contracts waiting. No safety net. New York was the first stop. It was supposed to be the doorway. Instead, it became a lesson. Label meetings ended the same way. She was told she did not curse enough. Did not talk about guns enough. Did not sell violence the way the market wanted. Some were more honest. They simply did not want to deal with a female rapper at all. So she made a choice. If the industry wanted a gangster, she would give them one. California came next. Compton, specifically. What followed was not the fantasy people imagine when they hear the word West Coast. It was hunger. Homelessness. Sleeping at bus stops. Sneaking into hotels just to shower. Eating whatever could be afforded that day. Some nights, it was just chips and silence. She and her closest collaborator survived however they could. Selling drugs. Drinking heavily. Staying alert at all times. There were predators everywhere. Moments when getting back to where they slept felt like winning a small war. Those years did not just shape her image. They reshaped her body, her instincts, her understanding of risk. Slowly, the music began to open doors. A feature here. A soundtrack placement there. A verse that caught the right ear. Her voice started to move through circles connected to established West Coast producers. Then it reached someone who understood timing and controversy better than most. Russell Simmons was looking west. And he saw something in her. She became the first female artist on Def Jam West. Not a solo fantasy, but part of a duo built to feel dangerous and deliberate. The name carried weight. The image was sharp. And the industry paid attention. In 1993, her debut album arrived. It did not whisper. It entered loud and unapologetic. The album climbed the charts. Gold certification followed. Singles dominated rap playlists. Videos ran on heavy rotation. Her voice, once ignored in small rooms, now came through speakers across the country. She toured with names that defined the era. She stood on stages next to legends. Even Tupac took notice, calling her one of the strongest female voices in the game. For a moment, it looked like momentum could not be stopped. But success in hip-hop has a short memory. And the same industry that opens doors quickly can close them even faster. Behind the scenes, tensions grew. Creative differences. Personal clashes. The partnership that carried her through the trenches began to fracture. What once felt unbreakable started to pull apart under pressure. She was at the top. But the ground beneath her was already shifting. Success brought visibility. Visibility brought questions. In 1994, an interview shifted the conversation. A national newspaper laid out details that many already knew but few had cared about before. Her upbringing. A stable home. Private school. 2 parents. Structure. The story did not accuse her of lying, but the message landed the same way. The image people bought into no longer matched the woman behind it. For some listeners, it felt like betrayal. For the industry, it became an excuse. The irony was hard to miss. Male rappers exaggerated freely, building empires on stories no one demanded proof for. But for a woman, especially a black woman, authenticity suddenly had rules. Her art was no longer just music. It was a character trial. At the same time, the partnership that helped carry her to the spotlight was breaking down. Years of pressure, shared trauma, and creative disagreements turned into open conflict. Arguments became routine. Trust eroded. Eventually, separation became inevitable. The duo dissolved, leaving both women to find their footing alone. She tried to move forward. A second album was recorded. New material. New direction. But the excitement was gone. Executives listened without enthusiasm. Meetings ended without commitment. Calls stopped being returned. The label that once celebrated her now questioned her market value. Then the decision came quietly. She was dropped. There was no public announcement. No farewell tour. Just silence where momentum used to be. In an industry that thrives on the next big thing, yesterday's headline fades fast. She relocated. Tried to build a different rhythm. Music still mattered, but survival took priority. Radio work replaced studio sessions. Interviews replaced verses. She remained connected to hip-hop. But no longer at its center. And then her body began to fail. Years of heavy drinking, constant stress, and life lived without pause caught up with her. Her kidneys started shutting down. Energy disappeared. Weight dropped. Public appearances stopped. Dialysis became routine. 3.5 years tied to machines that kept her alive but took everything else. Doctors were honest. Without a transplant, time was limited. The woman who once toured with legends now avoided mirrors. At her weakest, she weighed barely 80 pounds. Fame felt distant. Music felt unfinished. Survival became the only goal that mattered. A donor was eventually found. A miracle that gave her another chance. She returned to the studio when she could, recording through pain. Through medication, through intravenous lines that followed her everywhere. But the industry had moved on. Her story did not end in scandal or redemption arcs. It faded into the background. Quietly. Almost politely. And that silence would last for years. In America, hip-hop history is often told by the loudest voices. By the names that stayed visible long enough to become safe to celebrate. Her story did not fit that pattern. When gangster rap is discussed, the conversation usually centers on men. Their aggression is framed as authenticity. Their exaggeration is called storytelling. Their survival becomes mythology. But when a woman stepped into that same space, the standards shifted. Suddenly, she had to prove every line. America watched her rise with curiosity. Then turned skeptical the moment her background became public. The same industry that sold her image questioned her truth. The same audience that embraced her music debated whether she had earned the right to tell those stories at all. This was not just about music. It was about control. Female rappers were allowed to succeed, but only within boundaries. Too soft, and they were ignored. Too hard, and they were labeled problems. The space between those extremes was narrow and unforgiving. Detroit, a city proud of its musical lineage, eventually crowned new heroes. The narrative moved forward. New faces carried the city's sound into global consciousness. But in that retelling, her name faded. Not because she lacked impact, but because she arrived before the city was ready to claim her. Internationally, her story barely registered. Without constant media presence, there was no legacy campaign. No documentaries. No major retrospectives. Her influence lived quietly, passed down through artists who benefited from doors they never saw her open. It was only after her death that the tone changed. Tributes appeared. Messages surfaced. Artists acknowledged what had been overlooked. Suddenly, words like pioneer and trailblazer entered the conversation. America, once indifferent, now spoke with reverence. But recognition after silence carries a strange weight. It does not change outcomes. It only reshapes memory. Her story forces an uncomfortable question. How many artists are written out, not because they failed, but because the industry did not know how to hold them? And how many names do we only learn to say once it is too late?